Before we begin, take a deep breath and let the noise of the day slowly fade. Unclench your jaws, soften your eyes, and let the weight of modern life melt away. Tonight, we're not chasing action or drama. We're wandering into the forgotten corridors of boring history, where medieval echoes linger and dark tales unfold like fading ink on parchment. Welcome to Midnight Sleepless, a resting place for tired minds, where the Middle Ages, ancient empires, and strange, dark history. Stories drift by like soft clouds. Here, knights, castles, and quiet empires return, not with a roar, but with a whisper. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? And if you enjoy these slow, sleepy journeys through medieval times, boring facts, and forgotten worlds, a gentle tap on the subscribe button helps keep this calm storytelling alive. Now, let the story begin. Morning haze drifted across the ancient plaza of Tlatelolco, like whispered breath from the gods. Mist clung to the pyramids, softening the sharp edges of white stone. And the great marketplace stirred awake with a rustle of palm baskets and the thin cries of merchants. At the heart of this humming world stood a young woman named Xochitl, her name meaning flower in the ancient Nahuatl tongue, a fate that perhaps the gods, Seta, themselves had chosen with mischievous forethought. Xochitl had always belonged to this place, born among petals, raised on fragrance. Her mother had once been famed for weaving flower garlands so fine that even noble women of Tenochtitlan crossed the water to buy them. Now it was Xochitl who carried on that delicate work, fingers fleet and precise, knotting and braiding blossoms into crowns that shimmered with dew in the morning light. Her stall was small, just a woven mat and a pair of reed baskets overflowing with bougainvillea, yellow marigolds, crimson tropical hibiscus, and the rare, deep indigo blooms that only grew under the shadows of the far-off mountains. Yet, despite its modest size, people always paused before the sea of color that surrounded her, for Xochitl arranged her flowers, not like a seller, but like a priestess. Every petal seemed to sing. The marketplace of Tlatelolco was the beating heart of the Mexico world. Thousands came daily. Traders from distant valleys, hunters from Tlaxcala, from Tlaxcala, from Tlaxcala, from Tlaxcala, because if every petal seemed to sing, one to let the mark in the seas. The marketplace of Tlaxcala was the marketplace with Sinaz, Misili, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, das, I sent. Emerald jungles, fishermen with nets still wet from the lake. Women with salt white hair who sold woven textiles patterned with the stories of their ancestors. It was a world of noise. Parrots squawked above, merchants shouted prices, gourds clacked, cacao beans clicked into bowls, drums thudded somewhere deep across the plaza, calling attention to a new arrival. Yet, amid this chaos, Xochitl moved quietly. She knelt on her woven mat at dawn, arranging her garlands in careful stacks, her lips murmuring the names of each flower like prayers. Simple Sukul for remembrance, Simpo for sweetness, Quetzalcoatl for desire. Each one had a story, and she knew them all. Customers often asked not just for blooms, but for meaning. White for purity before a wedding, red for protection during war, yellow for guiding souls into the next world. On this particular morning, an old woman approached, her shawl embroidered with spirals of cloud and stars. She bent over the garlands with eyes still sharp and whispered, "A child in my family joins the Eagle Warriors today. I must honor the gods." What blossom brings courage? Xochitl smiled softly, reaching for the fiery orange petals of the Mexican marigold. "These guide not only the dead," she explained, "but the heart of the living. Their light is borrowed from the sun god himself." Huh. The woman nodded and placed bright cacao beans currency richer than gold. In Zacchito's palm, not all mornings were so peaceful. Sometimes rains flooded the causeways, traders shouted, over price disputes, or sudden edicts from Tenochtitlan's nobles sent whispers of fear through the market. But beneath it all, flowers always sold, for grief, for love, for celebration, for death. Humans always needed beauty. Zacchito's life followed the rhythm of petals. At dawn, she gathered blooms from the chinapas, floating gardens that bobbed on Lake Texcoco's shimmering surface, where farmers grew rows of vegetables and flowers atop islets made of mud, aquatic plants, and willow roots. They stood like emerald patchwork across the misty lake. There she waded barefoot between rows of blossoms, humming old songs as she picked only those whose dewdrops reflected sunrise. By mid-morning, she was in the market, weaving, selling, weaving again. As the months passed, her fame grew. People began to call her Makilxakitl, 5 flowers, after the god of dance, beauty, and fertility, whose symbol was a cluster of blossoms. Travelers spoke of her poetic garlands, claiming they brought luck and peace. Mothers tied her bracelets around infants, hoping they'd be blessed. Warriors tucked her red threads into knife belts. Even a palace steward once arrived, questing intricate displays for a tribute feast honoring Emperor Moctezuma himself. Yet, despite newfound attention, she remained humble. Zacchito's stall was still the same reed mat. Her dress was still the same simple woven cotton with a faded belt. Her joy did not come from wealth. It came from the moment dawn touched petals. Still, gossip fluttered. Some said she'd be married soon, that noble sons were asking her name. Others whispered she was a disguised princess. She paid no mind. She had other dreams. One evening, after the market had emptied and the moon rose silver above the stepped pyramids, a young Pakhtakatal merchant named Itzcoatl approached cautiously. He had visited for months, always buying small garlands, though he never said for whom. He was tall, with skin sun-bronzed from long journeys, his cloak patterned in reds and blacks, the mark of those who traveled far beyond the empire, returning with treasures. His eyes shone with both kindness and mystery. "Do you ever tire of this place?" Kay asked softly, offering her a clay cup of sweetened Totoli. "Do you ever dream of other worlds?" She sipped slowly. "Flowers bloom everywhere," she said, "but nowhere do they bloom so brightly as in Tlatelolco." He smiled. "Even so, have you dreamed of seeing cacao forests where blossoms are purple, or deserts where flowers bloom once every decade after rainfall?" Her heart stirred. She had only ever known market aisles, pyramids, lake shores, teas. Beyond that, what? She imagined walking alongside this traveler, hearing tales of Gulf coasts, of hummingbirds with crimson throats, of strange melodies in distant mountains. "And what of you?" she asked. "What do you dream of?" He bowed his head, hesitant, before saying, "Of a garland that never wilts." Zacchito looked down at the flowers in her lap. Already, some petals began to curl as night deepened. No blossom lived forever, but she had an idea. Every day she braided petals into thread. But what if the threads themselves were braided into something stronger? Something of cotton, dyed with flower pigments, then layered with pressed blossoms, sealed in wax. That night, beneath stars, she experimented in her family hut. She crushed petals for color, soaked cotton threads, molded beeswax around fragile blooms. Days passed in fevered creative labor. When at last she finished, she held a garland unlike any before, weighty, shimmering, infused with scent, its color preserved in wax, destined to remain vibrant even as moons turned. She returned to the market and waited. When Itzcoatl appeared, dusty from travels, she presented him with the garland. "For your dream," she said. He held it carefully, his voice caught in his throat. "Will you come with me to sell your beauty to places, even our emperors cannot imagine. She looked at her stall, at the flowers, whose lives were brief but meaningful, and felt a stirring of courage like the marigolds she sold. "If I go," she said, "who then will sell beauty to Tlatelolco?" "Perhaps," he whispered, "you will return with new beauties and teach others to dream beyond petals." And so she agreed. Not to abandon her city forever, but to journey outward, to learn the languages of distant blooms. She packed seeds wrapped in cloth, pressed marvels of her homeland into bundles, kissed her hot walls, and stepped aboard a canoe with its kodo. As it glided across the ink-black lake, their journey carried them to coastal villages, singing with wind chimes of shells, up jungled rivers, past orchids shaped like butterflies, across desert salt flats, where flowers erupted overnight from dry land like miracles. Everywhere she went, Sachito laid her reed mat and displayed her garlands. People who had never seen Tlatelolco gathered awed, buying petals infused with stories of pyramids and stone walls. She traded too, turning home each season with seeds of impossible colors: sulfur yellow, cactus blooms, violet teardrop blossoms. From cliffsides, flowers that smelled of pine or smoke or honeycombs. Her stall in Tlatelolco became a marvel beyond imagining, a garden of 100 worlds. Years passed. Sachito began to teach young girls to weave not just flowers, but dreams. Her market mat stretched until she had many helpers. Summers saw her braiding garlands for imperial ceremonies. Winters, she pressed petals for burial rites. Her face changed with age, but her hands remained nimble, and her smile never faded. One night, as moonlight washed over the plaza, turning stone steps, Silver Sachito sat beside its kotel and whispered, "Do you still dream of a garland that never wilts?" He touched the wax-sealed garland she had given him so long ago, faded slightly, but still glowing, still perfumed. "I see it," he said, "each time I look at you." She watched the petals beneath her fingertips and realized something. Beyond wax could preserve beauty. With each life she touched, every girl she taught, every customer whose grief was eased by her flowers, she had planted gardens inside human hearts. And those were garlands no time could unravel, nor death could fade into Tlatelolco. They'd still whisper her name, not as Sachito, the flower seller, but as the woman who taught that beauty, like blossom or dream, blooms brightest when shared, forever on soft dawns. In the great marketplace, filled with echoing steps and sunrise mist, a young girl somewhere kneels over a reed mat, arranging petals in colors bold and gentle. She listens closely, just above the hum of trade and temple drums. She might still hear a voice whispering the names of flowers like sacred poetry, and feel the ancient spirit of the flower seller of Tlatelolco smiling down upon her craft. The sky over Tenochtitlan blushed pink with the promise of dawn as young Cutely stepped out of his family's reed-woven hut. The cool morning air smelled of lake water and maize. And somewhere in the distant ceremonial precinct, a conch shell trumpet wailed low, haunting, ancient. It was the first sound of the day, the sacred call of Tenatio, the sun god, awakening both sky and city. Cutely paused, lifting his face to the breeze. Today was not just another morning of sweeping courtyards or helping his mother grind corn. On the metate, he would begin learning the teachings of his late father, Yatao. Once a revered keeper of time, a specialist trained to observe shadows, sounds, and celestial patterns so that the mighty Aztec Empire could breathe in rhythm with the gods, as his bare feet padded along stone paths lined with blooming marigolds. The city stirred. Canoes sliced through the canals, merchants unrolled reed mats in the markets, and temple priests prepared offerings of cacao and jade. Cutely's heart thudded with nervous excitement as he approached the House of the Sun and Calendar, an ancient stone building behind the Templo Mayor, etched with serpents, stars, and geometric patterns. Standing at the entrance was Master Tenochtitlan, a stern-faced elder with skin like smoked leather and eyes sharp as obsidian blades. Around his neck hung a jade disc engraved with concentric circles, symbols of the days, God, and heavenly cycles intertwined like snakes eating their tails. "You are Yautel's son," Tenochtitlan said, without asking. "From this day, you listen, you watch, and you remember. For in timekeeping, forgetting is death." Cutely swallowed hard and bowed his head. The stone courtyard within was unlike anything he had ever seen. At its center stood a tall pillar, carved with spirals and glyphs. Round it was a circle of stones inlaid in the earth, like the petals of a sunburst. On each stone sat a painted ceramic whistle or wooden drum. Master Tenochtitlan explained that this was the Shupo Wali yard. It's the heart of their time-measuring tools. "We measure time not with numbers," Tenochtitlan said, gesturing to the shadows stretching across the stone circle, "but with the movement of the sun, of echoes, of sound in air. When Taneshu walks across the sky, he tells us when to plant, when to sacrifice, when to march to war." He led cutely to a point marked with coiled rattlesnakes. "Here is sunrise during the dry season. When the shadow of the pillar touches it, warriors must prepare their shields over there." He pointed to another stone etched with maize stalks. "That is when the rainy season truly arrives, and farmers must sow beans and squash." Cutely stared, transfixed, as the golden light crept slowly toward the first marker. With each inch, time moved. But unlike the water clocks of merchants or the scratchy knotted cords used by cloth dyers to count days, this method carried the authority of heaven. Later in the morning, Tenochtitlan introduced him to the circle of sounds. Each whistle and drum had a different pitch, designed to mimic wind, thunder, jaguar roars, or bird calls. Each sound signified a specific moment in the day. "When the shadow of the pillar touches the first stone at dawn," Tenochtitlan instructed, handing cutely a bone whistle shaped like a hummingbird, "you blow this once. When it touches the second stone, you strike the turtle shell drum 4 times, like raindrops. When it touches the third stone, the time of scorching sun, you blow the jaguar whistle so that its roar echoes across the temples." Cutely obeyed. Carefully, he blew into the hummingbird whistle, releasing a high, pure note that rose above the rooftops. Within moments, women stepped outside their homes to begin cooking. Warriors tightened their sandals, and market vendors lifted baskets of chilies and beans. The city moved to the sound, cued by the shadow. It was extraordinary, a giant, beating heart pulsed by sound and light. That afternoon, Tenochtitlan taught him about the Tonalpahuli, a sacred 260-day calendar. It was a spinning wheel of gods and beasts, monkey, house, crocodile, jaguar, each day defined by a pairing of number and deity. Priests allowed no mistakes. Last year, the crops had failed, partly because a junior timekeeper misread the shadow on 7 wind, calling for early planting and angering Tlaloc, the god of rain. They could not afford such errors again. "You must study the dance of shadows," Tenochtitlan said. "Ketel, pay attention to how long they grow at sunrise or how sharp they fall at noon. Even the difference of a finger's width can change destiny." For weeks, Cutely woke before dawn and practiced. He learned how, in winter, shadows were long and thin, almost leaning over the whole courtyard, while in summer they were short and fat like stone frogs. He practiced the tones of every whistle, memorized where the sun touched each carving during every 20-day Vantina, and even began predicting the moment a cloud would hide the sun based on the thickness of morning fog. By mid-season, Tenochtitlan said, he was ready for his first true test, broadcasting the rain summoning ceremony, the most important ritual before new crops were planted. One wrong sound, one misjudged shadow, and the entire empire's harvest could fail. On the dawn of the ceremony, Tenochtitlan was draped in banners of turquoise and green. Priests in feathered cloaks dragged baskets of flowers to the temples, while dancers with rattling ankle shells formed lines along the plaza. The emperor, Huey Tlatoani Moctezuma, stood glimmering in gold and jade upon a dais. Watching with fierce expectation, Cutely stood before the pillar, bone whistle trembling slightly in his sweaty hand. Tecpatl was beside him, silent, his eyes gleaming with pride and warning. The sun edged above Lake Texcoco, sending a blade of golden light across the courtyard. Cutely watched breathlessly as the shadow of the pillar stretched like a snake toward the first glyph, a frog leaping into water. His fingers lifted the whistle. He waited for it to touch the carving. Not a heartbeat early, not a heartbeat late. Fleet. The note soared true, high and crystalline. Immediately, drums thundered from the pyramid steps, signaling the priests to begin tossing marigolds into sacred basins. The shadow moved again, and Cutely picked up a turtle drum, beating it with perfect rhythm. Next came the deep jaguar call. His breaths became smooth, calm, and his body moved without thought, perfectly in time with the shifting shadow markings. At the final note, the great shadow reached the maze glyph. Cutely beat the shell 4 times, long and powerful. A silence hung over this sacred plaza. Then a loud cheer erupted from temple, street, and causeway alike. Flower petals rained down, and Tecpatl gripped his shoulder tightly. You have called the rains. You have become a keeper of time. Months passed, and Cutely settled into his role. Dawn after dawn, he played the music of shadows and sounds, sometimes ushering in feasts, sometimes sacrifices, sometimes war. Through his keen observations, he noticed patterns previously unseen, that the shadow struck the serpent glyph a fingertip higher every year, that distant mountains swallowed the last light later and later, that the air itself felt different before important shifts. A key recorded everything in painted codices, connecting celestial signs, shadows, and temple sounds into a web of sacred knowledge. One day, Master Tecpatl motioned him over with an unreadable expression. It is time for you to see beyond even what I have shown you. He led Cutely to the top of the great pyramid of Huitzilopochtli, god of sun and war. From there, the city glimmered like a mosaic, canals glittering, temples rising, plazas buzzing with life. Look around, Tecpatl said. It's the shadows we follow, the sounds we send. Do you think only the gods listen? Cutely frowned softly. The people follow them too, he said, recalling how streets pulsed to his whistles. Exactly, Tecpatl whispered. Time is power. With it, we control the beating of hearts, the swing of obsidian blades, the opening of seed and flower. Never forget, the empire breathes because we tell it when to. Cutely felt both awe and fear. He understood then. That timekeeping was not just a sacred duty, it was the engine of the empire itself. Years rolled on. Cutely grew taller, his once boyish face now creased with sun and responsibility. As seasons passed, he became the one whom new apprentices bowed to, the one who judged the width of shadows at solstice, the one whose whistle call marked everything from corn planting to coronations. He also innovated. He designed a new array of sound makers tuned to the tones of wind, believing that on stormy days, Talok responded better to hollow reed flutes than bone ones. He mapped how the shadow trails changed based on smoke from thousands of cooking fires or dust from passing armies. His fame grew so much that even Moctezuma occasionally requested his counsel when planning campaigns for even war. The emperor, believed, must align with the movement of heavens and shadows. One evening, as Cutely stood beneath the blood-red sunset, he realized another truth. Though they had mastered the art of measuring time, they could not control it. Shadows still stretched and shrank with relentless rhythm, and every whistle he blew was nothing more than a reminder that another moment had passed, never to return. And yet, perhaps, that was his true duty, not to bend time, but to guide people through it with grace, discipline, and wonder. When Cutely grew old, his hair silver like moonbeams and his back bent like a crooked branch, he stood once more before the pillar in the Shupawala yard, a wide-eyed apprentice at his side. He lifted the ancient hummingbird whistle, edges smoothed by generations of lips. The first light of dawn spilled like liquid gold over the sacred market square. Nestled at the heart of an ancient city, where winding streets whispered tales of caravans past. As sunlight brushed over patterned cobblestones and awakened the bright awnings of stalls, the market stirred with 1,000 tiny rustlings, a broom sweeping dust, a lid lifted from a spice jar, a silk cloth unfurled with a graceful snap. Though the day had only just begun, old Marwan the potter was already ranging his clay urns with a deliberate care born from decades of patience. It was not goods alone that moved this market now. It was the gentle art of bartering, a dance of gestures, glances, and carefully chosen words. It was here, on this sacred ground, that a loaf of bread could transform into a bolt of fabric, a brass lamp into a pound of dates. Simply through wit and will. Marwan, with his silver-streaked beard and hands calloused by earthen craft, believed himself a humble maestro of this subtle art. He believed that bartering wasn't about winning, but about balancing. Trading stories as much as silver, weighing trust as much as wares. As the muezzin's call faded into the crisp morning air, Kay whispered a prayer under his breath, then waited for the day's first seeker. Soon enough, a young woman approached, swathed in a dark blue shawl embroidered with threads of moonlight. Her name was Zahira, a weaver's daughter, though her eyes hinted at dreams far bolder than looms and yarn. She paused before Marwan's stall, miring an oval jar painted with delicate crimson swirls. "It is beautiful," she said, and her voice broke softly, as though balancing awe and longing, made in the last days of spring. Marwan replied, "When poppies first bloom on the hillside, for one who sees beauty in simple things." Zahira smiled. "How much?" Marwan raised an eyebrow. "How much would you give?" She glanced down at the woven basket in her arms. Side lay 2 hand-dyed scarves, one amber, one green, smelling faintly of rosewater. Perhaps these. He took them with gentle fingers, feeling the softness of their weave. Strong yet delicate, he thought, much like their maker. He pretended to weigh them, as though judging threads like gold. Zahira watched nervously, the kind of anticipation that fluttered like trapped sparrows beneath the ribs. "1 scarf," he said finally, returning the green and keeping the amber. The amber carries sunlight in its threads, just right to hold a jar born of spring. Zahira's face burst into joy. The exchange made, she left, jar in hand, without a single coin changing palms. Marwan tucked the amber scarf into a wooden chest behind him, already thinking of which vendor might adore its exact hue. Across the square, activity swelled like a tide. Vendors selling pomegranates called out to those hawking goat cheese. Women carrying fowl under their arms exchanged hushed jokes with leatherworkers. The air filled with aromas of cumin, cardamom, roasting chickpeas, and incense that rose in twisting ribbons. Within this living tapestry, the practice of bartering reigned like an ancient religion. At midday, slim, quick-moving boy of 12 ran into Marwan's stall. Stisuf, an orphan taken in by the spice merchant Abdul, had grown sharp on the edges of survival. In his hands, he clutched an engraved brass button, perhaps broken from a nobleman's coat. Gleaming like a fallen star, he pointed at a stout clay jug. "Sir," Yusuf said breathlessly, "from my master's kitchen." Water spills from jars too often. Could this withstand heat? Boiling tea. Marwan tested its thickness. It will. Yusuf offered the button as payment, but Marwan shook his head. Your master once gave me pepper when I was ill. Take the jug and remember kindness. Yusuf stared, half stunned, half distrustful. Then, sensing truth, he clutched the jug to his chest, scrambling off. Marwan placed the brass button into his pocket. Not for trade, but perhaps for the memory of gratitude it carried. Such was the sacred nature of this square. Every object pulsed, with previous hands that had held it, with emotions lodged in its grooves. Not all bartering was swift and sweet. Some resembled complex negotiations between powerful diplomats. That afternoon, Ahira, renowned for her kaha pastries, dripping with honey and pistachios, arrived with a tray carried like an offering. The object of her desire was one of Marwan's largest vessels, a wide-mouthed urn adorned with lapis glaze. For my daughter's wedding, she explained, for storing rice, lentils, and love. One, knowing weddings brought both blessing and bargaining, smiled. Then it needs a fine exchange. What do you offer? Ahira lifted the cloth off her tray. The pastries glimmered like jewels. A dozen of my finest. Marwan stroked his beard theatrically. 20, 15, 18. Done, she said, victorious. They sealed the trade with laughter. As the sun turned orange and shadows grew long and languid, a hush often fell over the square. It was then that Marwan remembered his own youth. Once, he too had been poor, wandering the same stone paths with a heart full of hunger. A kind stranger had traded him a cracked jug for a poem scrawled on parchment, his first taste of kindness, born of barter. That moment had set the compass of his life. I must do the same, he thought. To give as I have received. Just before dusk, a traveler stepped into view. He wore foreign boots dusted with sand, a cloak woven in the style of lands beyond the desert. He examined Marwan's untraded pieces in silence. Are you seeking something? Marwan asked, after waiting a respectful moment. A gift, the traveler said slowly. For my wife. We have traveled far. Coin purse. ... He trailed off, embarrassed. Marwan watched him, recognizing the marks of long hardship. What do you have to offer? He asked. Gently, the traveler reached into his cloak and produced a small wooden whistle. It was carved with continents and stars, worn smooth by fingers and time. I carved this for my daughter before she died. The weight of sorrow in those words settled between them. Marwan took the whistle, turning it slowly, letting its tail seep into him. Then he wrapped his hands around a simple, elegant bowl, the color of the evening sky, and placed it into the traveler's stunned palms. No more words, Marwan said softly. Take it, for love begets love. The traveler, voice thick with tears, whispered his thanks, then vanished among the dwindling lanterns when the last glow of sunset melted into twilight. The sacred market square emptied, slowly, not of memories, nor of spirit, but of footsteps. Yet, somehow, even in darkness, it retained a heart that pulsed with life, like embers beneath ashes. Marwan gathered his remaining wares. Some pieces would sleep beneath his stall until morning. Others would be traded by sunrise. Still others would travel to far-off lands as part of another soul's story. Each vessel now held more than clay, held laughter, memories, stories, sorrows, and hope. That was the true value exchanged here, unseen, yet priceless. Before closing his stall, Marwan pulled out his tally, not one of numbers and coins, but one of connections made. Scarf that would warm delicate shoulders at dawn. A jug that would pour tea into the cracked cups of orphans. Rice urn that would bless a bridal feast. A sky-colored bowl that would whisper across a marriage renewed by kindness. Objects, he believed, were vessels for the spirit of generosity. He knelt briefly and touched the cobblestones of the square with gratitude. Around him, other vendors did the same in their own quiet ways, folding curtains, blessing stalls, thanking the sacred ground beneath. No place on earth was quite like this one. Here, trade was not merely an exchange of goods. It was a living conversation of souls. As Marwan walked home with his empty cart, the whistle tucked safely into his pocket, he felt a peaceful weight in his heart. He had given more than pots today. He had received more than scarves and pastries. He had, once again, practiced the gentle art of bartering, not as a merchant, but as a keeper of human connection. Tomorrow, sun would rise again over the holy square, washing its ancient stones in light. New stories would take root, blossoming at the edges of tents and in the glinting eyes of strangers. Coins might remain buried deep in pockets, but trust, wit, tradition, and compassion would circulate freely. Richer than any gold, and old Marwan would be there, ready once more for the sacred art of bartering, timeless and tender. Had always been less about what one owned and more about what one was willing to give. The first gray whispers of dawn had barely brushed the skies above Tenochtitlan when Zashidal stirred from her woven reed mat. The air still carried the cool mist of night, faintly scented with wet earth and the distant smoke of temple braziers. As she rose, smoothing back her long black hair and wrapping herself in a cotton hapri embroidered with red dogwood flowers, she listened for the familiar sounds of her family's home, the soft cluck of hens in their pens, the rustling of amaranth sacks in the corner, and the rhythmic breathing of her younger siblings, fast asleep. Today was Tiangui's day, the great market day of trade in bustling Xochitl must rise before the sun if she hoped to secure a good spot among the traders. She had inherited this task from her mother, preparing a tolia, warm, thick maize, drink-hand roasted amaranth, a beloved grain, to sell to early morning buyers. Her mother always said that traders, warriors, and porters alike needed strength in their bellies before a day of haggling and hauling, and nothing fueled them better than the comforting heat of a tole and the nutty crunch of amaranth. Silently, she stepped outside into their small courtyard, where a clay fire pit sat waiting. Dew sparkled like tiny jewels upon the broad leaves of squash plants growing near the walls. A turkey rustled in its basket. Carefully, Xochitl knelt and blew gently on the embers left from last night's hearth. With dried sticks and a twist of grass, she kindled the first flickers of flame. In their glow, she placed her large clay comal and began her work. First, she set about roasting the amaranth. From a tightly woven palm frond basket, she scooped out pinkish, bead-like seeds, each no bigger than a flea. Pouring them onto the hot comal, she stirred them in circular motions using a wooden spatula, never letting them sit in one place too long. They jumped and popped like tiny insects in the heat, bursting white with a light crackle. Smell that rose from them was delicate and earthy, the scent of new toast in faraway fields. As she toasted, her mind drifted to the terraces where the amaranth had grown. Her uncle had tended those fields by the lake's edge, waist deep in mud, planting each tiny seedling lovingly. Whatly, the elders called it food of the gods. The priests used it in sacred festivals, mixing it with honey for offerings, forming idols only to eat them later to take in divine strength. To handle such grain was an honor and a responsibility, a reminder that even in trade, one served greater cycles. When the grains were fully puffed, she collected them in a gourd bowl and sprinkled each batch with a mix of chili, salt, and ground pumpkin seeds. They would be irresistible, this way salty, spicy, and playful on the tongue. Children adored the crunch. Men prized the nourishment. She wrapped them tightly in woven leaf packets, arranging the bright green parcels in a reed basket. Next, Xochitl turned to the atole. She fetched a clay pot, nearly as large as her torso, filling it with water fetched last night from the neighborhood. Well, into this, she whisked ground nix, tumulized maize corn, soaked in lime to awaken nutrients. The mixture was cloudy and thick. As it heated, she added brown piloncillo, sugar, and a cinnamon-like spice brought by traders from distant lands. The steam that rose tingled her nostrils, sweet and earthy. She stirred constantly, humming softly the lullaby her mother used to sing, half to steady the rhythm, half to soothe her own nerves. This was not the first time Zakitl traded alone, but each time carried its own flutter of nerves. The Tianguis at Tlatelolco was no ordinary marketplace. It was the beating heart of Aztec commerce, where thousands gathered. Fishermen from Texcoco, traders from the Gulf Coast with cacao pods and bright bird feathers, fruit sellers, potters, coppersmiths, and spice merchants. Everyone met in that vast plaza of stone to exchange goods and stories. Even imperial officials meandered through, observing prices, taxing goods, and ensuring balance and justice. By the time the sky blushed pale pink, Sachito Azatoli had thickened to perfection. She ladled it into large gourds fitted with handles made of twisted agave fiber so she could pour easily. Steam curled like living silver threads above the pot as she secured a woven lid upon it. Wiping beads of perspiration from her brow, she checked her baskets twice. Atola ready, the amaranth packets perfect. She tied everything to a sturdy wooden frame which she hoisted onto her back. Soft footfalls behind her made her turn. Her little brother, Quali, rubbing sleep from his eyes, approached her. "Take this," he said, handing her a tiny clay figurine of a corn goddess their grandfather had carved. "For good luck." She smiled and tucked it into the folds of her waist sash. With a final glance at her sleeping home, Zakitl stepped into the awakening street. Other traders were emerging now, teachers carrying reed pens, women with baskets of tomatoes, a man loading turkeys into cages. Together, they formed a winding procession down cobblestone paths toward the lake's edge, where long wooden canoes waited. She found her uncle's canoe just as the horizon turned gold. He greeted her with a grin of missing teeth and helped ease her bundle into the vessel. "You'll do well today, Sabrina," he said, pushing the canoe away from the shore with a strong pull. As they glided across the water, early morning mists curled around them like the breath of ancient spirits. Great herons dipped their beaks, dragonflies flashed metallic wings, and the city across the lake shimmered with white stucco temples and pyramids that caught the newborn sun. When they reached the docks of Tlatelolco, Zakitl stepped out and joined the stream of traders moving toward the main plaza. Marble pillars glinted in the light, and in every direction stretched painted stalls stacked high with jade, cotton cloths, clay incense burners, and rope. Street criers called out prices, chanters sang prayers, and the scent of roasting meat and crushed herbs filled the air. It was overwhelming, exhilarating. She hurried toward the northern quadrant, where food sellers were permitted, passing a row of women grinding cacao beans, their malkachits rattling, finding a good spot beneath a stone archway near the western entrance. She spread a woven mat on the ground, placed her basket of amaranth to the front, and a gently steaming pot of atole atop a low bench her uncle had carved for her. Then she waited. It did not take long. A group of porters with thick ropes slung across their shoulders approached first. Their feet were dusty from miles of journeying. One sniff of the sweet steam, and the leader asked, "How much for a bowl?" "3 cocoa beans," Zakitl replied confidently. The men exchanged glances fair. One reached into a deer hide pouch and dropped 3 shiny beans into her payment gourd. She ladled thick atole into small clay cups, handing them with a practiced smile. They drank eagerly, sighing with satisfaction before buying 2 packets of roasted amaranth each to tuck into their travel sashes for later. Soon, others came. A young mother with a crying infant bought atole in hopes it would lull the child into peace. Two young warriors, faces painted red and black, stopped on their way to receive orders. One joked the atole would give him courage to face his commander's scolding. Even a merchant, richly clothed in turquoise-brimmed cotton, paused to buy an amaranth packet for my wife. As the sun climbed high, Sachito's confidence swelled. Skew, she moved with grace, pouring, serving, counting cocoa beans and jade beads. From time to time, she caught snatches of whispered conversations, the gossip of rising taxes on copper, rumors of a caravan bringing bright parrots from the south, and chatter that the emperor himself might walk the market today. The ideal sent a shiver down her spine. What if he passed by her stall? Late morning reached its peak when one of the Pachteca, the prestigious long-distance traveling merchants, approached slowly. His cloak was made of featherwork, more dazzling than any she had seen, and he carried an air of respectful pride. Young Sella, he said, eyes sharp. I've heard your amaranth is the finest crunch in the Western food quad. Is that true? Satito swallowed and nodded. He bought 5 packets, and Tito, after sipping her atole thoughtfully, placed a small square of cloth dyed indigo, a rare and precious color, in her mat. For my daughters, he said, with approval, before moving on. Sachito clutched the cloth with disbelief. This was worth far more than simple beans. It was a treasure she could use later to barter for things her family needed. By afternoon, her pot of atole was nearly empty, scraped clean, save for a few sweet streaks. Her basket had only 2 remaining leaf packets of roasted amaranth. She sighed, both tired and triumphant. Her back ached from sitting, arms from serving. But her heart was light as she tied her earnings into a small purse, beans, a copper ring, and that exquisite indigo cloths. She became aware of someone watching her. An elderly woman with kind, crinkled eyes and long gray hair braided down her back lingered nearby. She wore a simple white garment, yet carried herself like a matriarch carved of time itself. Your mother would be proud. The woman said softly, Setsutel's hands froze. You knew her? The woman nodded. I traded beside her many years. She had the warmest smile in the morning to Yangui's. You carry that same fire. Keep coming back, child. Soon customers will line up for your stall before dawn. Emotion welled in Zacito's chest. She bowed her head with gratitude and whispered, Thank you. As the plaza began to empty and shadows grew long across the stones, she packed her things and made her way back to the docks. The city of Tenochtitlan awoke before sunrise. Gentle mists floated on the surface of the lakes that cradled the island capital, while fishermen silently paddled their shallow canoes across silver waters. In the causeways and canals, merchants prepared for the day's bustle. Yet, far from the trading heart of the city, in a simple, reed-walled house on a quiet lane, Xochitl stirred from sleep. Xochitl was a weaver. She belonged to a long line of artisans devoted to the art of textiles, a craft honored in the Aztec world almost as much as stone carving, featherwork, or tempering obsidian. Her name meant flower, and it suited her well, for she colored the way flowers wore their petals, naturally, proudly, and without hesitation. The morning was soft when she rose. She stepped over tightly woven reed mats and lit a small flame with sparks from a flint, coaxing life into the adobe hearth. As the pot of cacao warmed and thickened, she hummed an old song taught to her by her grandmother. Round her skeins of cotton thread hung from wooden pegs like sleeping serpents, creamy white, deep scarlet, smoky indigo, hushed ochre, and bright cochineal pink, each shade a result of long labor and secret recipes passed down through time. Her husband, Aya, was a potter, strong and kind, who left early for the workshop near the market. Her children slept a little longer, though Euritzi, their curious daughter, often woke early to watch her mother. Shtitito savored the peaceful moments of dawn when shadows stretched long across her loom and the world had not yet sharpened to sound. Her loom was a backstrap loom, fashioned from sturdy cedar rods. It lay coiled on the floor like a resting animal. She tied one end to a roof beam and wrapped the other around her waist. The loom would live, breathe, and move with her body. Her posture, tension, and rhythm were as crucial to the fabric as her thread. Today, she began a noble task, weaving a new tilmatli, a cloak destined for a merchant lord. Visited her home weeks earlier, accompanied by servants and cloth sellers, to request a masterpiece. He wanted a cloak depicting hummingbirds in blooming maguey plants, woven in fierce reds and shades of blue, rarely seen even among the elites. "I will pay well for excellence," he had said, his voice low and demanding. Xochitl had bowed her head respectfully, but in her heart she had already accepted not the payment, but the challenge. "It's a true reward," she believed, and pushing the soul of color and cloth into new expressions. She began by sorting cotton fibers, smoothing each bundle with a wooden comb. Some were soft as milk froth, sourced from the valley of Oaxaca, while others held the faintest grit, brought in caravans from distant lands. She spun cotton on a slender spindle, her fingers moving with muscle memory. Spin, twist, draw, thread formed like magic. Each spindle's whirling hum whispered secrets of generations. Her dyes waited patiently in clay jars. The indigo came from fermented leaves of the chuculito plant, crushed and left under cloth for days. The cochineal came from insects scraped off prickly pear plants, their bodies yielding crimson so rich it looked almost unreal. Yellows she obtained from marigold petals, boiled with lime water. Blacks and grays came from charcoal and iron-rich mud. Once spun, the threads must be dyed. She took skeins outside to a sunny patch near her doorway. Yuretsi appeared, sleepy-eyed, clutching a doll made from cloth scraps. Xochitl smiled softly. "Colored day?" Yuretsi asked, brightening. "Yes, little dove." Together, they submerged the cotton in dye vats. The indigo dyed first, bubbling gently like a mystical soup. They watched white threads turn pale green before the air transformed them into regal blue. Cochineal was next. Skeins absorbed ruby red, slowly, like hearts, soaking life. Xochitl tied sections of thread with fibers to protect patterns, an old technique for streaks and spots. The house grew fragrant with earth and flowers. By mid-morning, all dyed skeins hung from a wooden pole, dripping into trays. The colors shone under sunlight like jewel stones stolen from the gods. While the threads dried, Xochitl prepared her design. On thin bark paper, she sketched geometric borders of talons and zigzag lightning. Within these, she drew hummingbirds hovering beside maguey blossoms. These creatures were sacred to Huitzilopochtli, patron of warriors, and symbolic of energy, blood, and transformation. The merchant lord wanted power woven, not merely beauty. She mixed powdered chalk with water for a light paint and traced faint guide marks onto the warped threads. These lines would guide her pattern during weaving, though observers would never see them. With great care, she wrapped bright warp threads around the loom's top beam, alternating reds and whites in harmonious sequence. She knelt, slipped the backstrap around her waist, and leaned back. The loom came alive. She inserted the shed rod to separate threads, slid a weaving sword to pack them tightly, and began. Over, under. Her fingers flew as she passed the shuttle through. The world flowed into rhythm. Outside, neighbors passed with baskets. Someone called a greeting. Spice sellers chanted names of chilies, maize, and amaranth. She barely heard. Her heart was within the threads. When she wove hummingbirds, the challenge sharpened. She must count threads with absolute precision, knotting colored wefts exactly where wings and beaks should appear. The tiniest mistake would distort a bird into a clumsy ghost. Yet her hands had long conquered fear. She wove boldly, breathing deeply. As the day passed, the cloth lengthened. She drank maize gruel and nibbled cold tortillas. Eerie ran errands and sometimes brought her plain river pebbles for inspiration. Xochitl laughed, explaining, each pebble's pattern could become cloth one day. Her neighbor, old Tlazacin, visited with spindle in hand. Still working? Your hands are like warriors, she teased. We fight to create, not to destroy, Xochitl replied. By sunset, she folded her work gently. A full day's labor yielded perhaps a hand's width of new cloth. True weaving was slow, a dance between patience and stubbornness. She massaged her sore shoulders and fingers, cleaned her dyes, and joined her family for supper. Kia shared stories of broken pots, demanding buyers, and gossip about distant battles. But Xochitl's mind drifted back to hummingbirds and flowers. Days turned to weeks. The cloth grew under her careful labor. It bloomed with birds that looked as if they might burst from the weave into flight. Her maguey flowers glowed with golden yarn, blended with the thread dipped briefly in copper salts. The borders pulsed with symmetry worthy of temples. One day, as she checked progress, a thought struck her. What if she embroidered a single hidden symbol inside the cloak's corner, a tiny flower representing her name? Not for pride, but for quiet remembrance. She chose a delicate spot, invisible from the outside, and stitched it carefully. When at last the cloak was complete, it shimmered. Its texture was supple, its weight both light and stately. Colors sang, but did not shout. They told stories instead. Hummingbirds glimmered like living messengers. The maguey stood majestic, honoring the drink pulque and the gods of fertility. This was not merely a garment, but a legacy. She called Aya and her children to see it. Euryzi gasped. Ya touched the cloth with reverence. This will be spoken of. Xochitl wrapped the tilt madly in a white cloth and set off with Aya to deliver it to the merchant lord. As they crossed the causeway into the busy city center, people glanced at her bundle curiously. Cloth was wealth more valuable than many other goods, and a new tilt madly, commissioned by nobility, stirred curiosity. They arrived at a grand stone house with serpent carvings. Servants led them inside. The merchant lord appeared, wearing fine jade ear spools and gold-studded sandals. You have brought it? Xochitl bowed and unfolded the cloak. Light flooded the fabric. The merchant lord stepped forward, silence wrapping the room. He reached out, brushing the surface as if touching water. This is ... He paused, eyes widening, searching for words. Exquisite. She waited, hands folded. You have woven life, he said at last. He called his steward, who counted out cacao beans, cotton cloths, and 2 small gold beads as payment. More than she had imagined. Yet earnestly, she cared little for profit. Seeing the cloak accepted with awe filled her heart. When she stepped back into the sunlight, payment secured, Aya grinned. You have outdone even yourself, Xochitl shrugged humbly. We must create diligently. The gods watch. They walked home slowly. By the canals, women washed clothes, children played, and men hauled baskets of maize. Life pulsed, ordinary and sacred. Xochitl thought of future projects, perhaps thrones for priests, or bridal hupil blouses, or garments for distant allies. There was always more to weave, more stories to bind in cotton and color. She returned to her humble house, sat before her loom again, and touched its wooden frame affectionately. Tomorrow, she would begin something new, for the quiet work of an Aztec weaver never truly ended. Each thread, each color, each breath contributed to the tapestry of worlds. That night, before sleep, Xochitl whispered to Euryzi, and one day you too will weave. Euryzi nodded sleepily. Yes, Mama, I will weave stories like you. Shojitail smiled in the soft firelight. Outside, stars blinked across the sky like scattered beads on velvet cloth. Somewhere, the gods turned their faces toward earth, perhaps admiring not great warriors or rulers, but the humble woman whose hands, in silence and dedication, created beauty eternal. The stones beneath Yartzi's sandals still whispered. Even after centuries of footsteps, merchants, warriors, lovers, mourners, the volcanic stones of the ancient street seemed alive with memory. She paused at the edge of the narrow lane, where dawn filtered through clay-tiled rooftops. Cand inhaled the faint scent of obsidian dust mixed with roasting maize. It was her first morning as keeper of the street. For generations, her family had swept, repaired, and guarded this road that lead from the sacred baths to the grand pyramid at the city's heart. The elders said each footstep left behind an echo, pressed into stone as surely as a carving. Yartzi's duty was simple. Walk the length of the street before sunrise, listening, watching, and remembering. She clutched the broom her grandmother had given her before passing away, made of stiff agave stalks bound in red string. Its bristles were worn, but magical in Yartzi's eyes. A true sweeper hears with her feet, her grandmother had whispered once, smiling despite her frailty. The stones will speak. You must learn their voices. She stepped forward. Lane, called Tenochtitlan, was older than most buildings in the city of Tenochtitlan. Its stones came from a volcanic eruption, long forgotten, hauled by ancestors whose sweat had mixed with black mud to form the first pavement. As Yartzi swept carefully, the stones gleamed like shards of night sky. She remembered stories of warriors returning victorious, each footfall sharp and proud, brides walking shyly toward new households, leaving delicate clacks of priests who slid silently as if carried by unseen winds. Their echoes still quivered underfoot, overlapping like faint drum beats. Suddenly, a sound behind her scrape, shuffle. Yartzi turned. An old man in a goatskin cloak approached, cane tapping. His face was wrinkled like baked earth. She stepped aside with respect. Keeper, he greeted her, bowing slightly. May I pass? Yartzi nodded. Cass, he walked slowly. Along the street, she noticed how each of his steps made a hollow, soft tick on the stones, a weary sound, tired but determined. She wondered what memory his footsteps would leave. Once he disappeared, she continued sweeping. Near the fountain, where water trickled from a jade serpent's mouth, she heard the faintest silver chime. It wasn't metal or wind. It was the ancient laughter of children who used to splash here, their feet stomping wildly across wet stone. She smiled. At midday, the street brightened as the sun climbed. Vendors rolled out reed mats, lining the pavement with pots of chili, woven belts, and necklaces carved from turquoise. Smells of cacao mixed with fresh lime. A young woman named Sidlali set up her stand of embroidered shawls. Keeper Yartzi, she chirped. Your street brings me luck. Customers say walking on your stones makes their hearts lighter. Yartzi blushed. She had never thought of herself as powerful, merely a girl with a broom, listening to echoes. Sidlali's words made her straighten her posture. Maybe the work truly mattered. Soon, crowds filled the street, sandals slapping heels, clacking, children scurrying. Yartzi leaned against a stone pillar to watch. She tried to read the sounds, hurried steps of men delivering news, soft pads of noblewomen in feathered capes, the scuff of pottery carriers balancing trays on their heads. Each had a rhythm. That afternoon, something changed. The usual harmony of echoes shifted. A low tremor pulsed beneath her feet. The volcanic stones, usually warm with life, hummed anxiously. Yartzi knelt, pressing her ear to the pavement. At first, She heard only the rumble of carts. Then it came. Thud, thud, dot dot. Pause. Thud, deep, resonant, unfamiliar, not echoes of past footsteps, but something new, approaching. A chill crept up her spine. She remembered her grandmother's warning. Some footsteps must not be allowed to leave their mark. She stood quickly and began sweeping harder, as if purification might drive away the strange pulse, but the vibration grew stronger. The vendors sensed it too. Conversations died. People shifted uneasily. Then from the far end of the street appeared a group of men unlike any Yerezi had seen. Tall, armor gleaming, carrying shiny sticks and wearing animal hides, not from any local beast. Their boots struck the volcanic stones with crushing force. Conquerors. The street fell silent, except for the chilling percussion of foreign steps. Yarzi watched, horror growing as the echoes changed. The stones beneath seemed to cry out. The old memories recoiling from this new sound. The leading man, face shadowed by a metal helmet, stared at the street as if judging whether it was worthy of his path. His boot came down hard. The stones shuddered. Yeretzi's instinct screamed, "Protect the street." She stepped forward, broom gripped tightly. Her voice trembled but rang across the lane. "This is the Kaliti pathway of our ancestors. You must tread with care." Her words were met with confusion, then a barked laugh from the armored stranger. He said something in a language of harsh angles. One of his men mimicked her sweeping motion mockingly, but Yeretzi did not move. Behind her, vendors, elders, young apprentices stepped closer, forming a quiet wall of bodies along the pavement. Their combined weight made the stones hum with courage. The leader's mouth twisted. "Hey." He gestured for his men to lower their sticks. The street keeper expected violence, but to her surprise, the conqueror sighed, motioned for his men to stay back, and took off his heavy boots. He continued forward barefoot, skin touching the hot volcanic stone. Each footstep now made a small, respectful tap. His men hesitated, but followed suit. Yaretz felt the ancient stones relax, those still wary. She swept a clear path before the stranger, guiding him forward like a ceremonial servant. The entire street watched in breathless silence. When the group reached the end of the lane and disappeared into the plaza, the tension snapped. People exhaled. Some cheered softly. Talis whispered prayers. Siley hugged Yerezi tightly. "You saved our street," she whispered. But Yerezi shook her head. "The stones chose forgiveness today. I only listened." That night, long after, vendors packed up in moonlight washed the stones silver. Yerezi walked the lane again. Her broom brushed slowly as she listened to the echoes settling the conqueror's footsteps, fading, merging gently with older, humbler sounds. Near the fountain, she heard once more that laughter of children. Near the baths, whispers of old lovers. And now, faint but distinct, lay a new echo, the cautious, barefoot steps of a former enemy seeking passage without offense. Yerezi realized the truth her grandmother had known. Streets had souls. They remembered every kindness and cruelty. Her job was not merely to sweep, but to keep balance, to ensure that the echoes of footsteps, past and present, remained worthy of being carried forward. She sat down in the middle of the lane and closed her eyes. The stones vibrated softly under her legs, a lullaby born of heat, history, heartbreak, and hope. From afar, a temple bell tolled. Dawn was close. Yerezi rose, lifted her broom, and began once more from the beginning of the street. Her footsteps were steady, confident. With each sweep, she sent out a silent promise. "As long as I breathe, I will listen." And somewhere deep beneath the volcanic stone, the echoes answered back. Rain drummed steadily against the woven leaf roof of the highland home. turning the packed earth courtyard dark and glossy. Inside, soft smoke curled from the hearth where thick cacao paste simmered in a clay pot, releasing a rich, bittersweet fragrance. Young Tamale, just 15 summers old, knelt beside it. Her smooth hands stirred the dark liquid with care, downwards, then sideways in the ancestral pattern her grandmother had taught her. For this was no ordinary drink. It was exadal, the drink of nobility, warriors, and priest-kings. She knew the price of error. Today's brew was not for her family's lips. It was a tribute for the mighty Tlationi, the ruler of the Mexica, who governed from far-off Tenochtitlan, the shining city in the lake. Once every 2 moon cycles, Tamale's village in the eastern highlands sent a caravan of offerings, baskets of cacao beans, bright feather-cloaked turkeys, vivid textiles dyed with crushed cochineal and polished obsidian blades. Though their home was humble, their tribute spoke of wealth and devotion as she stirred. Tamale's grandmother, wise and stern Yolitzi, her silver hair woven into braids, entered, carrying a cage of bronze-feathered guajolote, the proud turkeys that strutted with arrogance despite their wooden prison. Their wattles were deep red, the color of sacrificial rubies, and their tails splayed like fans worthy of a palace. Look at them. Yolitzi sighed with a small smile, wiping rain from her brow. More valuable than a chest of gold. The emperor himself would consider them treasures. Tamale's brows knit. More than gold, grandmother? Truly, truly, Yolitzi chuckled, touching her chest. Gold does not feed armies. Gold does not heal spirits or give strength before battle. Turkeys give meat. Cacao gives courage. Those bring true power. Tamale quietly let that truth root itself in her heart. 2 days later, under skies finally wrenched clean, Tamale watched the tribute caravan gather in the village plaza. Eagle guards from Tenochtitlan, gleaming in jaguar skins and feathered helmets, inspected every basket with sharp eyes. Pitas betrayed nothing. Pita, for their hands seemed hopeful as they checked the skittery turkeys tied with twisted cords and hidden cow beans wrapped in maguey fiber. Each bean, shriveled and dark, was tiny, yet Tamale knew 10 beans could buy a rabbit, and 100 could buy a tunic. Gold could buy luxury, but cacao built empires. The governor's voice boomed, announcing to all our humble gifts. The treasure of our lands traveled today to the heart of empire. Kalas's father, Quali, was one of those lucky or unlucky enough to escort the offerings to the capital. He hugged his daughter. When I return, I will bring you ochre dye from the lake, he promised. She hugged him tightly, inhaling the scent of smoke and maize on his clothes, praying silently to Tlaloc, the rain god, to keep him safe. 3 days of steady travel through jungled slopes and mist-tangled passes brought them to the marshy basin surrounding Tenochtitlan, its island towers shimmering like obsidian teeth. The Mexican soldiers led them over raised stone causeways where canals rippled with traded goods from across the vast empire. Canoes carried green quetzal feathers, copper bells, vanilla pods, jaguar pelts, but also humble turkeys and worn sacks of cacao beans heaped high on reed mats like precious gemstones. Quali marveled at it all once within the imperial palace. Complex, its walls glinting with turquoise mosaics and carved serpents, the tribute was catalogued carefully, not by goldsmiths, but by scribes trained in the Kamikak who dipped fine brushes into black ink and recorded 200 cacao pods, 10 live turkeys, feathers bright, valued at 2 quetzali each. Their ink strokes glittered more heavily over cacao beans than even golden trinkets. But while the tribute was measured, weighed, and bundled into depots, an unexpected summons arrived. Quali and the other escorts were called before Huey Tlationi Moctezuma to himself. They trembled. No tribute-bearer expected such an honor. The ruler's eyes were sharp, yet distant, as if he stared strangely beyond the fabric of this world. And yet, he smiled at the sight of their sizable turkeys and cacao gifts. "Your birds," he said slowly, voice smooth as lacquered wood, "are large and well fed. Your cacao is fragrant. This is good. The empire grows not on gold, but on strength and ceremony. We are pleased." Quali bowed, head low. "It is our life's pride to serve." Moctezumo's attendants escorted the humble villagers out swiftly, but their hearts soared. Not because they had met a man robed in gold, but because the things they had carried from their humble soils, plants and birds, had won true honor back in the village. Days later, Tamale waited anxiously, clutching a small purse of cacao beans. Her mother had carefully hidden away the seeds of next year's tribute. Without them, they would struggle to pay taxes, or even buy salt or cloth at market. When Quali returned, weary but smiling, he carried a surprise. Not gold rings or jade beads, but 2 young turkey chicks, a new breed from the capital. Atia. Feathers shimmered with speckles unseen in their region. From the emperor's own aviaries, he told Tamale. To grow our stock, we are trusted now to raise even greater gifts. Tamale touched the chicks gently. More turkeys, more wealth. And Quali placed a small gourd in his daughter's palm. Cacao seeds, different from ours, harder, richer, from lands far south. With these, perhaps our next tribute will be even grander. Yulitsi, emerging from the doorway, smiled. Knowingly, you see, little one, not gold, but life is the true currency of this world. Years passed. Tamale, once a shy girl, became a confident young woman, keeper of the village's turkey pens and cacao groves. She bred bigger birds, glossy feathered giants bursting with strength and pride, prized by every merchant who crossed their lands. Her father taught her to navigate tribute routes. Grandmother schooled her in the sacred preparation of cacao drinks with ground chili, vanilla orchid, and maize foam. Each moon cycle, merchants arrived begging to buy even a single turkey for 3 quachtli, the price of a fine cotton cloak. Women bartered cacao beans like coins. The rains were poor and maize failed. It was cacao drink that sustained warriors and bridged peace between villages. One day, a Nahuatl speaking trader from the coast stumbled into Tamale's courtyard, dazzled by her flock. He offered gold a bracelet of hammered discs for just 1 male turkey. Tamale shook her head politely. "Gold cannot hatch chicks," she replied. "Bring me cacao beans, vanilla pods, or obsidian blades. Those will feed my people." Trader, perplexed, bowed and left. Her grandmother laughed until her sides shook. A child, true daughter of our soil. But the world was changing. Rumors swirled through the markets like storms. Winds. Pale-skinned strangers had landed on the coast, arriving on floating mountains. Their metal glinted white, not yellow. They craved gold more than life itself. They would kill for it, barter for it, melt it into heavy bars. But when they tasted cacao, spiced with chili, whipped with young maize, served in a vessel painted with hummingbirds, they blinked in confusion. They did not understand why Moctezuma bestowed cups of this dark, bitter drink as a gift greater than coins. Nor did they understand why turkeys strutted through palace courtyards like nobles, touchable by all but royal hunters. Tamale watched, wary. One afternoon, while visiting the market at Cholula, she overheard 2 Spaniards, their tongues strange, their boots muddy, shouting at a native trader. One held up a woven bag filled with cacao beans and sneered, "We asked for gold, not seeds." The merchant bowed deeply, explaining that cacao beans were currency. But the foreign men spat on his wares, calling them worthless. Tamale's stomach twisted with anger. Did they not see the value of life within those seeds? In the mountains, cacao trees were delicate, needy, sacred. They did not grow just anywhere. A single storm could destroy a year's crop, and turkeys, proud companions of the gods, required patience, care, and fortune to raise. Gold glittered prettily, but it had no soul. As seasons passed, the village heard tales of destruction, temples looted, emperors imprisoned. Gold torn from statues and melted into bricks. Amidst chaos, Tamale quietly protected her birds and trees, even as neighbors panicked, hiding their treasures beneath floors. One evening, by flickering torchlight, Yolitsi took Tamale's hands in hers. The foreigners will take gold. Let them choke on it. But our turkeys and cacao, guard them. These are our true inheritance. No matter who wears the crown, they will always need food and spirit. So Tamale devised a scheme. She trained her youngest cousins to breed the turkeys quietly in hidden hill pens, far from prying eyes. She spread out her cacao plots, hiding new saplings among maize to disguise them. And slowly, while the world crashed and jewels changed hands, her wealth of living treasure grew. Hungry soldiers, native and foreign alike, came seeking strength during long marches. They could not eat gold. They paid Tamale in whatever. They carried iron knives, cloth, even silver, just 4 bowls of thick cacao, drink, or slices of roasted turkey meat that melted on the tongue. She accepted their desperate trades reluctantly, knowing each transaction placed her in greater danger, but also ensured her people's survival. Morning came softly to the ancient city, pouring honey-gold light over carved rooftops and crooked alleyways. From a small stall tucked beneath the broad marble steps of the temple, Rajan, a middle-aged merchant of incense, clay lamps, and painted prayer beads, unfolded his woolen mat as he had done for nearly 2 decades. It was still early. Bells had not yet begun to toll. Pilgrims hadn't yet crowded the courtyard, and priests were only just waking from their saffron-draped sleep. But this was Rajan's favorite hour, for the clatter of sandals, before the bargaining and gossip, before smoke rose in thick clouds toward the gods. This gentle hush was when he truly saw the world. He smoothed the tangled cloth, lining his display boxes, and carefully arranged each of his wares. Tapered incense sticks perfumed with sandalwood and jasmine, garlands woven from marigolds by his wife, miniature clay pots for offerings, and strings of beads painted crimson and ivory. He placed them with care, not for show, but as an act of quiet devotion to his trade, to time, to life itself. Above him, temple steps climbed with graceful weariness, each one shiny from 1,000 bare feet. The stone lions, at the base, once fierce, now looked faintly amused by centuries of worship. Rajan leaned back against his stall's bamboo frame and watched the street wake like a drowsy animal. From across the road, the tea seller, old Basu, rattled his brass kettle and blew into it, sending a plume of white steam swirling into the cool dawn. The sound of tinkling glass came from Leela's bangle shop as she polished rows of bracelets, ready to catch the sun in the eyes of young brides-to-be. Off in the corner, a pair of skinny temple dogs stretched, yawned, then began their patient patrol for scraps dropped by pilgrims. Rajan's eyes, hawk-sharp, soft brown, followed each little moment. He leaned forward ever so slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, as if he did not merely sit beneath the temple, but guarded stories most people hurried past. A farmer came first, a stout man, dusty from his journey, carrying a bundle of rice wrapped in cloth. Rajan knew he had risen long before dawn to walk these steps. There was devotion in his heavy strides, not flamboyant, not desperate, but stubborn and sure. Faith, Rajan thought, watching as the man bowed from the waist and placed his humble offering near the shrine. Minutes later came a young girl in blue. She paused at Rajan's stall, brushing back a loose braid. "Uncle," she whispered, "which of these is luckiest?" Rajan shrugged kindly. "Whichever one you believe in," child." She smiled shyly and chose a single bead, plain and smooth, to place on a copper plate before the goddess. Rajan, in return, tucked a second bead into her palm unnoticed, a quiet blessing for her prayers as the sun climbed higher. So did the sounds, a rising tide of voices, bells, footsteps, laughter, bickering, chanting. The priest lit the first lamp at the entrance, welcoming those who wished to pour their hearts into the ancient deity's ears. Women arrived with baskets of coconuts and bananas balanced on their hips. Men in white cotton dhotis clutched garlands and jars of clarified butter. Young couples, giggling behind the temple pillars, came seeking blessings for future babies. Old widows shuffled up in silence, their lips a moving line of mantras. Rajan observed it all. He witnessed tears, both of joy and sorrow. At noon, a mother clasped her hands and sobbed openly, begging the goddess to save her feverish son. Not long after, another mother beamed with delight, her newborn in her arms, whispering thanks for prayers answered. Rajan, who had himself lost a child many years ago, felt both pains equally, handed the weeping mother incense without charge. To the joyful woman, he only nodded with a smile. Some emotions required no words. The city breathed like a living creature around him, loud, messy, beautiful, around midday. When both feet and tempers grew tired, Rajan reached for his brass tiffin. His wife, gentle and stern in equal measure, never failed to pack it: hot lentils with cumin, soft rice, 2 fried pakoras, a piece of jaggery for sweetness. As he ate, he watched the pigeons flutter above, flapping their gray wings as if delivering news from the heavens. Occasionally, someone would stop and strike a conversation. There was Surin, prankster, guide of pilgrims, Rajan by. He would say, "You must know all the temple's secrets by now." Rajan would shake his head slowly with that eternal half-grin. "If I told you everything I know, friend, you would never believe it." Then there was Uma, the flower seller across the way. A widow with sharp eyes and quicker speech, she had claimed her corner long before Rajan arrived. Every afternoon, she would shuffle over, leaning on her cane, to offer him a garland. "It's my custom," she insisted. "For good neighbors make good luck." Rajan would accept the garland each time, placing it beside his incense, pretending not to see how she watched, to see where he positioned it, as though proximity to his best-selling goods meant divine favor for her humble blooms. By late afternoon, the temple steps emptied a little as the sun blasted overhead. The shadows of the pillars stretched long fingers across the stone. A moment of calm returned, not unlike the dawn. Rajan leaned back again, half closing his eyes, hearing the low hum of prayers swirling above. Children played nearby, tossing pebbles, chasing hens that roamed free from the temple's courtyard. He watched them, reminded of his son who had once sat exactly so, laughing as he tried to catch pigeons by the tail feathers. That laughter had faded 14 summers ago when illness came like a thief in the night. Rajan's world quieted after that, but over time, life, slow, stubborn, insistent, returned. He rebuilt his stall, one corner at a time, believing more in the rhythm of days than the spectacle of miracles. As evening crept in, wind teased the banners strung across the temple's facade. An orange glow danced on the stone walls. One by one, oil lamps were lit, lining the steps like small captured suns. The aroma of ghee and jasmine now thickened the air. Night brought its own kind of devotion, softer, more private, imbued with longing. Lovers pressed their foreheads together before the goddess. Merchants tallied their coins. Musicians gathered with drums and flutes to play devotional ragas. Rajan straightened his shoulders, preparing for the final rush of the day. Stories came pouring down the steps. A pilgrim from far Kashmir, whose eyes shimmered as he offered a costly silk cloth, a a wandering monk who sat briefly beside Rajan, with nothing to buy, but plenty to say. The monk claimed inner peace came from detachment. Rajan only smiled, for his peace came not from renouncing the world, but by watching it fully. At the final bell, Rajan tied up his remaining wares in burlap. His day's earnings were modest. Enough for vegetables, a pair of bangles for his wife, and perhaps some sweets for the neighbor's children. But wealth, he believed, was not only what one could hold, it was also what one witnessed. Before closing up, he performed one small ritual. He lit a single incense stick for the goddess, bowing his head faintly. But his prayer was not one of asking. Instead, in the privacy of his heart, he simply said, "Thank you for another day to see." As the moon climbed above the temple spire, silvery and sad, Rajan stepped out from behind his stall. With a final glance up the stairs, he joined the last trickle of people making their way home. His gait was unhurried, his back slightly bent from years of daily sitting, yet there was contentment in every step. From a distance, the temple loomed grand and bright, its lamps flickering like stars, brought down to earth. At its base, where gods and humans met in concrete and clay, Rajan left behind a small piece of himself each day, not in objects sold, but in silent understanding, unspoken solace, and calm observations. For while the world hurried forward, greedy, noisy, restless, Rajan knew a powerful truth. Sometimes, to truly live, one only had to be still and watch. The first light of dawn stretched its sleepy fingers across the valley, brushing the tops of trees and waking tiny birds that darted from branch to branch. In the small village of Tenochtitlan, nestled along the winding riverbanks, smoke began to rise from clay chimneys as morning fires crackled awake inside her modest reed-walled home. Now Waddle, a young artisan in her 23rd summer, stirred from her woven palm mat. Her hands instinctively reached for the wooden splinting knife that rested near her pillow, a habit formed from years of devotion to her craft. For Nahuatl belonged to a long line of master weavers whose baskets were not merely containers. They were stories stitched into form, patterns that whispered of migration, harvest, moon cycles, and forgotten gods. As she stepped outside, the village was already coming alive. Children chased chickens through dusty courtyards, women pounded maize into doughy masa, and elders sat with pipes, watching everything with deliberate calm. Nahuatl's booth in the central marketplace waited for her. Today, however, was not an ordinary day. She had been chosen, honored, to prepare ceremonial goods for the upcoming festival of the new rains, a sacred time to summon life-giving water from the skies with gifts of astonishing beauty. This year, the elders had asked her to create a collection worthy enough to be carried into the mountain temple. 3 pieces symbolizing earth, air, and life, a woven basket, a feather fan, and a painted gourd. Each had to embody the soul of the community, capturing its heart with threads, plumes, and dazzling pigments. At the marketplace, Nahuatl unfurled her woven mat and laid out coils of reed, willowy fibers, and smooth cords. Her neighbor, Ixtel, the feather worker, smiled, arranging iridescent quetzal and macaw plumes into fans that shimmered like sunlight on water. Across the way, Chimali, the gourd painter, with hands always speckled in red and blue, cracked a joke about how long it would take Nahuatl to complete all 3 sacred requests. He bid her a jar of fermented pulque that she'd be finished only by the next festival. Nahuatl laughed, but worry pinched her insides. Expectations were high, and so was the honor. She began with the basket, the heart of her world. Selecting long stalks of palm reed, she trimmed each one to a perfect slenderness. Soaking them in gentle water made them supple, ready to bend and braid. Her fingers worked quickly, crossing reeds under and over, breathing life into a flat base. Elder women stopped to watch, commenting quietly between themselves how the girl had her grandmother's talent. For Nahuatl did not simply weave patterns. She conjured them from dreams. The first rose took shape in simple browns. Then came a splash of wild red dyed from cochineal beetles, spiraling upward like dancing fire. Into this rose-red spiral, she pressed tiny seeds, amaranth, maize, sealed them within the weave as symbols of Earth's abundance. By midday, her back ached, but the basket now stood proud, a deep, wide vessel whose sides shimmered with shifting colors. Carefully, she etched atop the rim a pattern of entwined snakes, symbols of fertility and eternal life. As she placed it aside to dry, villagers murmured in awe. Children leaned their chins onto their hands, watching her next move with wide eyes. For the feather fan, Motto traded with Excel. He handed her a selection of treasured feathers: emerald quetzal, blazing scarlet macaw, muted owl. Each feather had its own spirit, its own story in flight. Nahuatl set a handle of smooth, polished bone, wrapping it in soft deerskin. Into its spine she drilled tiny holes and slid feathers carefully into place. To the left, green feathers that fanned in an arc like jungle canopies. To the right, red feathers that burst like horizons at dusk. Downy owl feathers formed the inner circle's symbols of wisdom and calm. But Nahuatl was not done. With thin strips of copper and gold, donated from the village smith, she wrapped the base so that light reflected across the feathered glory. When the sun touched the fan, it bloomed with shimmer and motion from afar. It looked as if an exotic bird had come alive, curving its wings. The painted gourd was the most delicate of all. Chamali brought her several hard-shelled gourds, each rounded as the moon and smooth as egg. Nahuatl chose one the color of sunset, warm orange flecked with gentle earth tones. With carved obsidian blades, she scraped away tiny patterns, grooves turning into spirals, spirals into lilies, lilies into celestial suns. When the carving was done, she mixed her pigments: deep turquoise from crushed stones, blinding white from powdered shell, midnight black from charred bone. Using a fine bird bone brush, she began to paint. A river wound around the gourd's equator, representing time. Along its current swam tiny fish, the ancestors guiding descendants. Above it, she painted maize, growing from the mud, reaching up to the clouds. Each leaf was brushed with such care that it swayed if you tilted the gourd. Around the top she painted human figures dancing, holding hands, symbolizing unity. When she finished, even Chamali was speechless. "It looks like it breathes," he whispered. Day faded into twilight. Fireflies flickered over the river surface like fallen stars. Nahuatl sat back. For her lay her three creations: the woven basket embracing earth, the feather fan honoring air, and the painted gourd capturing the pulse of life itself. She carried them home under the soft glow of moonlight, where her mother whispered blessings over them before Nahuatl wrapped them in embroidered cloth. 3 nights later was the festival of new rains. Lanterns were lit all along the stone path leading to the old mountain temple. Drums thudded like the heartbeat of the valley. Smell of roasting cacao pods and sweet atoli steamed from clay cups. Dancers, painted in bright skins of blue and gold, moved like jaguars, weaving through crowds. Children ran with painted faces, tossing flower petals into the air as the moon reached its peak. Nahuatl stepped forward, carrying her creations on a cloth-draped cedar tray. The entire village fell into a hush. Elders, seated around the temple steps, watched, silent as ancestors. A young priest, his face calm, but eyes sharp as eagles, motioned for her to approach. She presented the woven basket first. The priest tapped its rim and nodded slowly. "It holds not only seeds, but hope," he spoke loudly so all could hear. Next came the feather fan, which, when lifted high, glowed like many colored wings against the moon. Gasps rose from the crowd, Air breathed through beauty brings rain upon wings. The priest then took the gourd, rolling it gently in his palms. When he saw the dancing figures in the river, he held it close to his chest. Life sings again. Drummers struck the hide of jaguar drums, and thunder echoed as if the god Tlaloc himself had spoken. The priest lifted all three items into the night sky. The crowd knelt. The wattle felt her heart pounding. Then, as if commanded, distant rumblings began. Old wind stirred leaves into little whirlwinds. Clouds crawled across the velvet sky. Thunder boomed again. Rain, fat, sudden, magnificent, tumbled from the heavens. People shouted in joy. Faces turned upward, laughing, crying as water soaked skin and hair. Nahuatl stood still as the rain plastered her dress. Tears mingled with the sky's gift. The priest leaned close and whispered, "You have pleased the gods. The river will run full this year." Nahuatl wanted nothing more than to run, dance, scream with joy. But she bowed deeply. From that day forward, her name was spoken with reverence. Orders for her baskets multiplied. Nobles from faraway highlands sent messengers bearing silver for just one of her works. But Nahuatl remained in a Catlan, rising each dawn, dipping reeds in water, whispering stories into each curl and knot, 'cause she understood something others often forgot. True magic was not thunder, nor feathers, nor paint. It was in the care one placed into living things. Only when love soaked through her fingers did baskets bloom like sacred flowers. And every year, when the clouds hesitated and fields began to thirst, the villagers sent Nahuatl up the mountain. Again, always carrying the woven baskets, feather fans, and painted gourds, to sing rain from the sky with nothing more than beauty, patience, and faith that stories, when told well, can change the world. Morning in the lakeside village of Candiopar began not with loud alarms or bustling engines, but with the gentle whisper of water gliding through narrow canals. Dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and saffron as the first rays slipped across the surface of the vast lake, making it shimmer like melted gold. Along its edges, simple mud brick homes with reed roofs stood shoulder to shoulder, their small porches draped in fishing nets, baskets, and strings of drying herbs. 15-year-old Aliyah, daughter of a boatman, awoke to the familiar hush of rippling waters and the rhythmic creak of a wooden water wheel nestled near their doorstep. She sat up on her straw mat, breathed in the cool, damp air, scented with lotus flowers and moss, and listened. There it was again, the soft murmur of the canals that ran like veins through their village, carrying life, food, and stories from house to house outside. Its canals crisscrossed each sandy lane, bridged by narrow planks of wood that children skipped across and elders cautiously stepped over. Boats lay tethered to posts, gently bobbing, while ducks glided along the channels, dipping their beaks into the water for breakfast. Aliyah loved this time the most, the fragile moment before the village fully woke, when everything felt suspended and sacred. She quickly tied her long oiled hair into a braid, splashed her face with lake water from a clay bowl, stepped into her faded lilac shalwar kameez. Her mother, a dignified woman with smile lines at the edges of her dark eyes, was already up, grinding spices on a stone slab as steam wafted from a bubbling pot of lentils over the earthing stove. "Aliyah," she said, without turning, "take these fresh rotis to old Chacha Kareem down the canal. His back is aching again, and hurry, we'll need help sorting fish before Abu returns." Nodding, Aliyah wrapped the warm rotis in cloth, stepped into battered sandals, and pushed open the wooden door. Outside, the canals reflected pale morning clouds, so clear it seemed they led straight into the sky. She hopped onto their tiny boat, tied beneath the house, and began to paddle down the canal street. Wooden houses drifted past, each with its own soundscape, a woman scrubbing clothes against stone, the ding-ding of metal cups. A child practicing a flute. Halfway down, she spotted old Cha-Cha Kareem leaning on his cane while coaxing chickens away from his waterside vegetable patch. His home perched so close to the canal that Aaliyah could hand him the roadies from her boat. His eyes crinkled gratefully. "May the lake bless your family, Betty daughter," he rasped. "With children like you, this village will stay golden." Yes, she paddled back. The day had begun to stir. A fisherman's whistle floated across the water. Women balanced baskets of wet laundry on their hips as they headed toward the platform by the lake edge, chatting as their colorful dupatas fluttered in the breeze. The lake itself stretched wide, silent, a mysterious host to hundreds of tiny islands, thick with willow trees and reeds. Its surface was now dotted with fishing boats heading outward, each a silhouette against the brightening horizon. Ali's Abu, a boatman named Iqbal, was among them. He was famous for his skill at weaving through narrow reed passages. No outsider would dare row into Wand for returning with the plumpest catch of carp and catfish. Fisherfolk often said the canals whispered directions to him, guiding his boat toward bounty. Back at home, Amma had laid out reed mats and wooden trays to dry along their porch. Aaliyah helped gut fish, clean rice, and prepare baskets of goods they would carry for sale by the lakeside bazaar at noon. Between chores, she paused to watch life flow around her. A group of boys diving off a stone platform into the canal. Girls skipping over planks, carrying copper pots of water, and vendors pushing boats packed with mangoes, clay pots, and fragrant marigolds. By midday, the once quiet canals had transformed into lively channels of motion. Boats navigated like bustling carts in a marketplace. From the lake, the villagers traveled inward, steering their vessels toward the bazaar, a wide open square where reed mats were spread. And every household traded stories as much as goods. Here, the water canals met dry land, and Aaliyah felt the world bloom into color. She took her family's boat, loaded with baskets of fish, pickles, and bundles of lotus stems, and secured a spot near Fazia Auntie, who sold hand-woven mats. A nearby canal flowed gently, providing a constant chorus against the babble of conversation. Shoppers stepped from boat to shore, some arriving from distant lake settlements, tasted pickles, poked fish, bargained fiercely, and traded gossip. Who was getting married, whose cow had fallen sick, whose son wrote letters from the town across the desert. The bazaar felt like the very heart of Candelpur. Canal water sparkled along its borders, carrying with it the laughter, songs, and disputes of daily life. Aliyah sold most of her goods by mid-afternoon, and heat settled heavily on the thatched roofs. Vendors dipped cloths in canal water to cool their foreheads. The old water wheel creaked somewhere beyond, lifting water to nearby vegetable terraces. Steady rhythm. It's like an ancestral heartbeat. Sometimes visitors from the distant city of stones would arrive, eyed and amazed. Canals instead of streets, they would exclaim. Boats instead of ox carts. Your lives flow like poetry. Keela's heart swelled with quiet pride. They did not have towering mansions or grand arches, but their lake, their canals, and their humble ways had sustained generations. As afternoon ripened, Leah left the bazaar and guided her boat back home. Mischievous canal children, younger kids who treated the waterways like their personal playgrounds, splashed alongside, laughing when boats rocked from their dives. Dragonflies hovered over lotus buds, and shadows of syrup-colored fish danced below the surface. Evening descended, slowly in lavender hues. The water cooled again, its whisper returning from chatter to secret. Aliyah sat on the porch as Amma lit an oil lamp, its soft flame reflecting in a puddle near the canal edge. Across the canals, women hummed lullabies while rocking babies in reed cradles. Smoke rose in thin spirals from clay stoves. The smell of cumin and fried onions filled the air, mingling with wet earth and perfumed water. From their doorstep, they could hear a boo rowing back, singing a lilting folk tune. His boat touched home, and he stepped onto the small landing with a broad smile. "Aaliyah, bring the lantern." "I've brought you something," he called. She hurried forward and gasped. From his cloth basket emerged a tiny tortoiseshell kitten lost on a reed island and rescued before nightfall. Its blue eyes glinted like moonstones. Amma laughed. "Another mouth to feed, but I suppose the canals will provide." They named the kitten Shahzadi Little Princess. As moonlight spilled across the lake, Shahzadi curled on a mat while Aaliyah fed her milk-soaked bread, gazing out at the canal where silver ripples stretched into infinity. The night canals were different, deeper, darker, almost mystical. Elders often told tales of how moon spirits danced on the water, watching over the village. Aaliyah, though young, believed it. There was something alive in the canals, the way they murmured, the way they reminded her of time flowing forward. Before sleep, she stepped out onto the narrow plank bridge behind their house, closed her eyes, and whispered a wish. "May life flow gentle like canal water. May our village stay woven together, just like the net my father casts, never breaking, always holding." The next morning, before the first bird could sing, the canals would once again awaken. Water would flow softly past doorsteps, nourishing rice paddies, silently carrying each boat forward. And so, daily life by the lake went on, ever changing, ever constant. Leah knew she was a small part of this living tapestry where water, work, dreams, and tradition coiled together along the winding canals. For in Kandalber, it was not the sound of clocks or car horns that measured life, but the gentle, eternal murmur of water in the canals, whispering the poetry of everyday survival, love, and hope. Thank you for resting here a while, for stepping into the quiet world of soot-darkened pots, morning fires, and the quiet care of a cook who stirred more than just soup. If your eyes feel heavier now, it's only the calm weight of time wrapping gently around you. May your night be as steady and comforting as the rhythm of a spoon on iron, soft and unhurried. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're warmly welcome to subscribe only. If it feels right, and if you're still awake, feel free to whisper where you're listening from, or just say good night below. For now, sleep well and let the past keep you company a little longer.